trying to find permission inside of me to go to the place of just non-doing, just being, and not for 1 hour, not for one day, but for genuinely like a month on end, just existing and still feeling lovable. That was so challenging, so deeply challenging.
Welcome to The Slowdown, your time to define success and growth for yourself with a little inspiration from others. We're back at London's Brazen Studios, and my guest this week is Alexia de Broglie, the founder of financial education platform Your Juno, as she embarks on a journey of trying to live life differently. We go vulnerable and personal, talking about her masculine model of success, her year of change, and the role money has played in the loss of community. I'm so excited to share this one with you. Let's dive in. Welcome, Alexia, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I was telling you just before we started recording that I'm really quite nervous about today because I think we're going to go vulnerable, we're going to go personal, we're going to go beyond the beaten path of past recordings that I might have done around like how to start investing. And yeah, I really wanted to just kind of like mention this at the beginning of the recording so that I also hold myself accountable for like, let's go to places that I haven't shared before. Let's go personal. Let's go deep.
Well, I love that. Okay, perfect. Well, let's go straight there. I'm really curious at what point in our childhoods we become aware of success and start falling in line with certain masculine capitalist protocols. Tell me a little bit about little Alexia.
Wow. I was raised in a very non-traditional family because my mom was a polyamorous hippie that absolutely doesn't believe in the idea of being normal or having any shoulds, just like pure free spirit. But then my dad comes from like a very old traditional French family and has been very successful and like has a very clear idea of how you should live your life. And if we go back to the idea of like at what point was success defined for me, I think there is a key element in my upbringing that has kind of shaped who I was up until recently. And that was the fact that the love of my father was only expressed through admiration. So it was never, I love you. It was always, I'm proud of you. It was never, this person is kind, this person is sweet, this person is funny. It was, this person is very successful. This person has this and this title. Like it was always in the sort of idea of like what capitalism defines as success as well. And so obviously being a little girl that really wanted the love of her father, I was like, let me become that. And I think I spent most of my early adulthood just like trying to become the idea of like a capitalist successful man, really. Like not really in touch with my emotions, just like go, 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 always doing more. And that's also why I went to McKinsey, then I went to PwC. I think it's also why I started Juno, raised money from VC. It was just like, what can I do that's going to be the most admirable and therefore make me feel the most loved and worthy?
Right, wow. It's so interesting because I did a TEDx talk about masculinity and femininity, and I think it's interesting how the masculine of your father dominated your feelings, because one could say, what about your mother, like, and her femininity and her wanting maybe something else from you and showing you love in a different way. And for me, my mother was the masculine, and I very much followed her. Femininity will guide you, but it's much more like ephemeral and soft and subtle and not as noticeable.
Yeah.
Whereas masculinity will literally pick you up and put you down somewhere else. And so I think people notice and feel masculinity more. All that rambling is to say, why did you not feel like following some of your mother's more feminine traits?
Exactly what you said is the right point, is like the feminine is subtle. The feminine happens in slowing down and noticing, really putting your attention towards, I mean, I don't know, I would call the feminine like almost like a bit magical in a certain way. I would call the feminine the source of nature, the source of wonder. And it's not something that we're taught to ever pay attention to. I think what we're taught is, how can we become as big as we humanly can be? How can we become as successful as we can be? And that is in the masculine. That is in the directional, like, I'm going to go this place and nothing's going to stop me. And And so the feminine just gets suppressed.
What were the jobs that you started to do out of university and that kind of led you towards Juno? Was it all in tech? What was the sort of career trajectory?
I spent my university years partying and like not studying a lot. But then I realized I was like, okay, so I don't have the best possible trend like CV by the end of uni. My grades aren't where they need to be. So I basically spent like the last 2 years of uni like trying to find as many internships as possible. And I always blended traveling and working together. So I was doing an internship in Paris at Chanel. Then I was working for Jurlique in Hong Kong. Then I went to LA for a startup. So it was really just like location first, and then let me try and see what I can find as a job there. But that did end up, I graduated therefore having had done quite a few internships. And so then I immediately went into consulting because that was like the most successful thing you could do. And the internships, even though my grades weren't what they needed to be, kind of opened those doors for me. And so I went to McKinsey first, and then I went to PwC, and then I started Juno whilst I was working at PwC. I think it was during lockdown, so we were working from home, and I was like trying to get my PwC job finish as quickly as possible. I was taking a lot of study drugs at the time, really bad, but I was just like, I need to start Juno and do this PwC job. And obviously there's only so many hours in a day. And so a friend of mine dropped some study drugs at my house and I started them. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. I have
what
like
are study drugs?
Like modafinil, for example, which is drugs that you take if you have ADHD. I did not have ADHD. I don't have ADHD. And so they just kind of like turn you into a machine where whatever you put your focus towards, you can just do for like 5 hours straight.
Wow.
And yeah, I was basically working my job during the daytime, taking the study drugs at nighttime. And then it was pretty horrible. But then we raised money for Juno the first round. So I was like, okay, I've got financial security. I can quit my PwC job. I can now do Juno full time. And then that's when the transition to Juno happened. And then we moved to London with my sister. And yeah, this is how I ended up here. And now we've been doing Juno for 4 years. No more study drugs. I stopped as soon as we raised money. Thank God.
What were the consequences of them?
I honestly think like when I was in my masculine, I could do anything. I mean, it's I'm not want to over glamorize it, but it feels like my whole body was just in a completely different state. Like I could do study drugs, next day nothing. I could like go to work without sleeping. When I was starting Juno, sometimes I'd go out and then go to the office at 8 a.m. without sleeping, and like no one would pick up on it. Taking drugs, it's like the nervous system is so fired up, and I thought it was happiness. I was in a state of like constant stress, but I really thought it was happiness because it was adrenaline, and I was like, whoa, I'm alive. That's all I wanted to feel. I wanted to feel alive. And so there was no stop button. I think when my current partner met me, he was just like, what are you made of? Like, this is insane. How do you do this to your body? And I was like, yeah, I can do it all. Like, blah, 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 unstoppable. And I think the consequences came maybe later on, but I have to say they've been quite mild. There's been quite like a mild transition out of it and into, going into nothingness and resting and being like, oh, this is what I feel like when I'm not hyper-stimulated and like not full of stress. And I'm like, I thought that was boredom, but actually it's quite nice.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And obviously you started your business with your sister. How did you decide to have a sister co-founder?
Yeah. I mean, I've always admired people like you that start companies with someone that isn't a sister. I don't understand like how you can get through it. To me, it was obvious. I mean, Margot and I have always wanted to start a company together. Since we were little girls, we had like a plan, like we knew we're going to be co-founders one day. I had a notebook with lots of ideas, and I used to call her up like once every 3 months being like, this is it, Margot, I found it. And like, it was like 3D printed shoes and like lots of random shit. And then one day I told her about Juno and she was like, yeah, you know what? I think this is it. And then we started working together. But our relationship has been through, I think at the beginning, we had to learn how to be co-founders.
Right.
Because we were sisters.
Right.
And so we did coaching. And what was really interesting was not so much learning how to be co-founders, but actually we did more coaching about 2 years later on like learning how to be sisters again, because at that point we were just talking about work all the time.
Yeah.
And so, we literally just went through professional coaching to learn how to be sisters again and like how to hang up at the end of the day and like transition into another type of relationship.
Wow.
But it's been incredible. I mean, I trust her more than I trust anyone else. I think her brain is incredible.
Yeah, I guess in hindsight that does make sense. There's an implicit trust that comes with a sister.
Yeah.
And once you became a founder and, this lovely idea of you and your sister, we're going to make this thing, we're going to be founders. Once you got into that role, was it everything you thought it was going to be? At what point did it start to become, wow, I'm really being driven by ego validation, performance, productivity at all costs, fear of not being enough?
Yeah. That honestly, it just came recently. I think it came with like the first failure that was, maybe the first big failure in my life. So far, everything had been going in the way I would have liked it to go. And then this year, we were going to get Juno acquired by a huge company in the UK. It was going to be a life-changing amount of money. And what was the beauty of it is that they actually were going to let us run Juno in the way that we have been running it so far. So it was going to stay Juno, completely independent, like a dream for any founder. Mm. And then we were in negotiations for about 7 to 8 months whilst running Juno. We'd let go of lots of employees because the runway needed to last for getting us over the line of the acquisition. So it was like a pretty intense and horrible year. And then basically on the day of signing the deal, one of the key decision makers in that company stepped down. Mm-hmm. And they basically told us until he's replaced, which will take like another 3 months, we can't proceed with any deals at the moment. And I don't know if the new person that's going to step in that big role is going to want to pursue Juno as like their first priority. And so that meant the end of that acquisition process for us. And so for the first time with Margot, we were like, okay, something's not going by plan. We've worked for this so much. And I think at the time when it happened, we didn't even process anything for like the first 2 weeks. We just kept working, being like, okay, we're going to get another acquisition. We're going to get this make this happen. And then eventually it bit us in the butt. Like every time I opened my laptop, I got a headache. I was like crying all the time. And I didn't really know why, because I was so not in touch with my emotions that I wasn't able to like put any reason behind the tears. I was like, oh, I'm just crying, but let's keep going. And then that really forced us to like reconsider what we're doing. And we were saying we're acting out of a place of fear now. We're acting out of a place of, I don't know what's going to happen to Juno, but something needs to happen ASAP. And we're going to say yes to something that we don't want to do. And so we just gave ourselves at the time 6 weeks to close our laptops and do nothing. And that ended up turning into almost like 6 months, I would say. And in those 6 weeks, I have been confronted with so many of my fears of unworthiness because I had failed the Juno acquisition. I was eating so much food. I was doing nothing. I was at my mom's house in bed, just like stuffing my face, looking at TV shows. Margot was doing the same next to me. And I was like, oh, I feel so unlovable. And I'd be on the phone with my partner. And I was like, I don't think you can love me like this anymore. I'm not the same woman I used to be. And like, just really confronted with the idea of like, this is everything that I was dreading was going to happen. And
who am I without my masculine successes?
Who am I without this kind of like robotic superwoman that I had been so far? I was not able to control things around me anymore. There was like, the way Margot and I put it is, there was no energy left in the tank to do anything. And so that meant not doing anything for Juno, but also not doing anything for ourselves. It was not eating healthy, not exercising, not socializing. There was just no energy left. And so we had to redefine ourselves when none of those things were actually giving us a sort of reason to be. And actually what I found is there's so much beauty in that. And I think thanks to the support system, my partner, everyone around me, I was like, whoa, I actually am still loved whilst I'm being a potato. I haven't showered in 5 days, but people still say that they love me. This is incredible. And all of our investors were super supportive and just said, girls, try and do whatever feels good. Honestly, you've done so much so far. Try and do what feels good for you and for the business. And I haven't been able to pick up my masculine since then. I think it's sort of that forced me out of it. And now if I work too much, if I feel like I'm too much in control, if I'm too much in a place of like, am I doing this because I want to get validation? Immediately I start crumbling and I start crying. And so I haven't actually been able to get back into that. And I'm so happy for that, because I feel like I'm discovering a new side of myself, one that's softer and one that's maybe more in touch with what's happening inside of me and my intuitions. And it's also leading me to making some big life changes. And I think Margot and I are going to keep doing Juno, but in the same way that you're doing female narratives, which is not to be sold, not to be scaled, but actually just like focusing on having impact locally and doing it in a way that feels resourceful for us as well.
You also mentioned in the post where you shared about that failed acquisition, this idea that rest is a radical act in our society. And when you did get rest at your mother's house, how did you feel?
So guilty. So guilty. And that's the problem, is that I was like, I was trying to rest, and at the same time there was 50 voices inside of my head being like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be doing this. And it's so hard to, I think, especially as a woman, to give yourself permission to go there. And I was working with a fantastic friend of mine who's also a therapist, and I honestly feel as though every session we did was just around giving me permission. It was me crying and being like, oh, I wish I could do this, but I can't. And then she was like, who's that voice inside your head that's telling you that you can't? Is that your voice? Is that society's voice? Is that your father's voice? Like, where does this come from? And is it truly yours? Does it belong to you? She said, when you're disciplined, you're always the disciple of something. And so what are you being a disciple of? Is it of yourself, or is it of societal expectations? Is it of what capitalism has fed you as this idea of success? And so trying to find permission inside of me to go to the place of just non-doing, just being, and not for 1 hour, not for one day, but for genuinely like a month on end, just existing and still feeling lovable. That was so challenging. So deeply challenging. And it sounds, again, there's a voice inside of my head that's like, it sounds so dumb. You're just not, just there and resting. Of course, that's fine. But it's internalized so deeply that that's not lovable.
No, I understand. I mean, I kind of self-diagnosed myself at one point as being addicted to stress, which made me make sense, where other people would be like addicted to like drugs, alcohol, all of these. I was like, I don't have these problems. I've got it all figured out, right? And then I realized that actually, when I've got loads on, and I would always say, ask, if you ever need something done, ask a busy person. Like, I'm so good at organizing all of these things. And actually, when I had nothing to do and there was a period of space and blankness, that was when I was the most in my existential and crazy. Yeah. Because being alone with my own thoughts was a scary place to be in. So I filled it with busyness and stuff to do. And then I realized, if I was honest with myself, I was probably quite addicted to stress. Yeah. And again, when I read that post that you did, it really resonated with me. There were two quotes. One that I mentioned, which is, doing nothing and resting felt like a radical act of self-love in a world that taught us to glorify exhaustion. And the second is, we'd gotten caught up in the glamour of being exited founders. And I think that's another like key component of the capitalist model, where we're told to hit all of these steps and then maybe when it's all done, we'll be happy, right? And I think this might have been one of your best performing posts, and definitely on engagements and comments. And I was wondering, why do you think people resonate and respond in such a way to this? And have you seen a shift in more people sharing stories of vulnerability, redefining success?
Yeah. I find it so hard to show up authentically on social media, especially when it comes to posts like these. There's always a voice inside of me that's like, oh, is that going to be like fishing for support? And, right. But at the same time, I do think that, that people can sense when there's a true place of vulnerability. And I feel as though we're all exhausted. I don't know if this comes from living in London.
It's a pretense. We're keeping up appearances.
But I honestly think we're all drained. Like, all of my friends that have entered the workforce, I give them 3 to 5 years in their first jobs before they hit a place of exhaustion. And you have this like fire inside of you when you start your career and you're so excited about it. And there's this dream, I'm going to make lots of money, etc. Hit the 5-year mark and everyone is like, oh my God, what is work life? Why are we doing this? This
Reality
is dreadful. In. And so I think just being, maybe, this is without wanting to sound, in any way arrogant. I think the life that Margot and I lead, because we've been able to kind of hit the milestones that capitalism tells us is success. I think there's a lot of people that look at this life and they're like, oh, those two are living a dream life. Like, right. Those two are happy. Like, they're definitely kicking it. And so for us to actually admit that, even on this side of the fence, it's pretty miserable and there's not that much happiness, except for, the way I would kind of describe it is, you said you weren't addicted to drugs, but you're addicted to stress. I would say that, creating a LinkedIn post because you've been featured in a specific magazine, writing an article on like your latest fundraising round or something like that. I almost feel as though it's the highest, significantly higher than, doing a line of cocaine. Like Margot and I would post this, and then the amount of like positive validation that you get, we're just sitting there and we're like, oh my God. And you feel so good. And it's such a high. It's like, wow, we're changing the world. We're doing this. But it's not out of a place of love of like, oh, I want to change the world and do, be of service. It's out of a place of like, I'm not enough. And suddenly everyone's telling me I am enough. And so for like 2 hours, I am enough. And then you're like beaming. And obviously then it goes back down. People stop interacting with it. And so then you're looking for the next high to fill. And so I really think it's almost like we have this kind of like junkie behavior when it comes to success. And like, I want more. It's like trying to fill a bathtub that has holes in it. And it's like always draining out and you're always trying to fill it with more water. I definitely remember when like the body positive movement started going and there was a lot of vulnerability on like your physical appearance. But I haven't seen it so much when it comes to career. I feel as though I see it from people that aren't in like high positions of power, but I'm yet to see it from really successful CEOs. I haven't seen much vulnerability from them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You described 2024 as your year of change. You went to ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts, an organization that offers workshops, retreats, and training programs centered around sexual empowerment, personal transformation, and spiritual growth, fostering healing and awakening in its participants. What was that experience like for you?
Would you have told me that I was going to speak about ISTA on a podcast 2 years ago? I would have laughed. ISTA is an incredible experience, but it's very full on. It's a sort of week-long container where you are being supported in kind of getting rid of all of societal expectations and norms. And it's almost like the best way I would describe it, it's doing sort of like 10 hours of therapy a day. You do it for a week.
Wow.
But the idea is it's not necessarily so Western in the idea that therapy and talking about your emotions is going to get you to a place that you want to be. It's also very focused on body. And one of the main beliefs of ISTA is that in our current society, we're very focused on the mind. We're very focused on ascending and sort of, if you think about, traditional religions, they promise paradise beyond your body. It's when your physical self is going to die that you're going to go into paradise. There's such an idea of like the body is sinful. And so ISTA is basically about the opposite. It's about like descending. So rather than trying to escape the body and to meditate your worries away and to become more and more sort of enlightened, it asks you to go in like all of the dirty stuff that we try and avoid on a daily basis. And so that's anger, that's sexuality, that's, food. It's like everything that we think is too dense to go into as a society and that is deeply repressed is what you are encouraged to essentially explore in that container. And usually when you go to ISTA, the idea is you don't really know what's going to happen there. It's a sort of mystery school. But what I often share with friends is one of the first exercises, because I feel as though it sets the tone, is you arrive and you actually have a conversation between your head and your body, and then your body and your head. And you do this fully unclothed in front of the entire group, which is often like 50 or 60 people. And then all of the exercises following that go harder and harder and harder. So it's just to give you an idea of like, they go deep and they go there quickly. And what I found is my partner and I both did it. And it has completely transformed our relationship to our bodies, our relationship to what it means to be human. And I feel like it's kind of given me this perspective of I was trapped in my mind for so long. And for me, being intelligent, being funny, being someone academic, being someone, all of these mind things were like, this is the peak of humanity. Whereas now I'm like, actually being in tune with my body and trusting my body is something I want to explore more. And it's crazy how much we're being taught not to trust our bodies when we grow up. If you think about children, the first thing that children do is they explore pleasure. If something feels good, they want to do more of it. And immediately we put them in a classroom and we tell them, hey, you're not going to get up. You're not going to choose what you're going to learn. You're going to stay sit and you're going to raise your hand if you want to go to the bathroom. Don't trust your appetite. Don't trust your intuition. And we're like completely removed from our own bodies. And so I think a lot of the process this year has been landing home again and landing in, this place that I inhabit and that isn't just my mind, and being able to listen to the cues and knowing that stress isn't dopamine, and that knowing what it feels like to be safe, in here, to feel like, yeah, this is home, and I want to build a relationship with it, not just escape it through my mind.
Maybe this is a rabbit hole or a dead end, but I'm curious. You've mentioned a couple of times your body and food, and earlier you mentioned food and control, and you mentioned being at your mum's house and eating a lot. Is that an issue that you struggled with?
When it comes to food, I mean, for so long, women have been told that they're too big, that they're too skinny, that they're too that. And finding the right balance of like, where do I take up enough space that I am commanding in a room of men? And where am I then too big to suddenly then to take up too much space? And I feel as though there's so much about our physical appearance that is constantly judged as a woman. So yeah, I think my relationship with food is complicated. There's definitely moments where I go into what I would describe binge eating, a sort of insatiable desire to just finish, 5 bags of cookies and just numb myself completely. But what I've learned now through therapy is like, it's almost like a cry from my body to be like, come back to me. You've been in your mind for so long. By just completely stuffing myself with food and making myself almost immovable, I'm in bed and I'm just can't move anymore. I'm too full to do anything. It's like, oh, thank you for listening to me, for coming back into my body. Like, thank you for giving me rests. Thank you for slowing down. Healing the relationship with slowing down and with rest is also healing my relationship with food in that sense. Yeah, it's a really tricky topic when it comes to food. I think there's still a lot that I need to look into there.
Another thing that happened in your kind of year of change, as we're calling it, is that you met your partner, and he challenged your assumptions about, as you said, what it means to make you lovable. You and your partner have opened an Instagram account called Let's Live Differently on leaving big city life and discovering different ways of living. Where have you guys been so far?
Yeah.
And what have been your top 3 learnings?
Yeah, so I mean, a bit of context to this. My partner and I have been together for about 2 years now. And I think both him and I have had very traditional careers up to date. And we've been going through this year of change together, which is what has been so wonderful. It's like having someone there to do it with you, and rediscovering sort of what is it that we really want to do if we get rid of all the shoulds and all of the expectations. And one of the main things that we found is, I don't think we find happiness, at least Louis and I don't, in the way that cities are set up and in the way the space that community is given in city life. Even if you are someone that is very extroverted and has lots of friends and goes out all the time, I don't think that there's a lot of sort of deep contentment that can be found in the type of going out that we were doing in London, going to the pub, getting drunk, going out, etc. I read a book called The Art of Gathering, which sort of completely changed my perspective on what it means to be surrounded by people that bring intentionality in social interactions. And so for a while, we tried to have more of that in London, but we just couldn't do it. And I think, speaking to a lot of other friends, it seems as though city life has just kind of depleted us from the feeling of belonging. And we're now wanting to essentially start a experimental community where people can come and kind of live without this feeling of having to do anything. And so we're going to rent a van starting in sort of March and go through all of France and try and find a place that we like. You can get castles in France for the same price as like a 2-bedroom in London. It's crazy. And basically just set up what we would like it to be a sort of an intentional community where people can come and live more in touch with land, more in touch with themselves, more in a feeling of community. And so to kind of gain an idea of what we want to set up, we are kind of traveling around at the moment. And so we spent a lot of time in India now, sort of 2 months there in Goa. We're going to South Africa next. And then we're going to go to a place called Château du Fay, which is a community in France as well. And the sort of learnings that we've gotten so far, at least from my time in Goa, is how much more in touch they are with the cyclical nature of life, with the life-death life cycle, how much more there is celebration around someone passing away and actually believing in reincarnation. And kind of, if you think back to nature and how nature moves in periods of cycles, we've tried to remove that completely. In the Western world, it's always about growth and it's never about degrowth. Then I think just in general, like a feeling of being enough. They're not impressed with your titles. They're not impressed with your LinkedIn. They want to see the human and they want to see how you interact with them. And so feeling a lot more a sense of love and belonging and community in those places. And the last one is just simplicity. I mean, the best things in life are free. There's this quote, and in London you forget about it because it feels like breathing here is so expensive. But just doing nothing and being with friends and having really meaningful conversations and being of service towards other people around you, towards nature, it really has filled me with so much more joy than I've ever been able to find in London.
I mean, I'm excited for you. You know, to play devil's advocate a little bit, is this project not something that can only be done because you have a successful career and you have the privilege and the money to be able to go and travel and try these new things? And because you had a business that made profit, you can now have a passion project.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. I mean, I would be lying if I said that privilege doesn't feed into this so much. I think, being able to, one, travel, but also being able to even consider buying a castle, even though they are very cheap in France, it's still a castle. And having, lots of people come and live there, you need some financial background for this. But I almost see it I would say like a duty in a certain way. Margot and I have grown up privileged, and we've grown up with families that had money, that were able to pay for education, that were able to pay for a lot of travel, and something that's always been embedded in that privilege was the sort of notion of like, don't hide in that privilege and don't feel guilty about it in a way that you're not going to do anything good in this world. Like, you are a vehicle for change. You have been given means that a lot of people haven't been given. Now make the most out of it to create change for your communities, which is also why we started Juno. It was this thing of, we've been taught about money. We've been taught about investing when we were young. This is not something that is in the public discourse, at least not around my female friend circles. And so how can I use my privilege as a tool for change? And how can I how can I embody and basically say, okay, I am a white woman, I'm able-bodied, I have grown up with education. That means I can be in rooms full of old cis white male, and I actually am in a position to maybe influence them. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to try and make the most out of it. And I think the same is true for this chateau situation. We want people to be able to come and live there without paying rent, just by being basically working on the chateau. So like, for example, working in the kitchen or something like that for like 10 hours a week. Obviously, that means that we're not going to get rent out of this. And the only way that we can propose such a solution is because there has been financial privilege behind, but we see it as like, we can now create a space where people can also benefit from it.
As you said, it's rather than just trying to create more and more and more out of what you have, how do you reach a point where you say, okay, maybe I have enough.
Yeah.
And now how do I use that to create a space and a container and a vehicle for other people to live in a way that I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Earlier you said the word should, and in your description of this project, you said it would be the land of no shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
Can we learn to act out of a place of love instead of fear? And it kind of just reminds me of my dear friend Lauren Taus always tells me that I should so much that I should all over myself. It also made me think of, we're comparing prices and places of where to live, and, spending time in Goa might be expensive to get to, but the price of living there and being a digital nomad there is so much less. Have you heard of the Ramen Index?
Mm-mm.
It's this concept of it's used to measure the cost of living in a particular location based on the price of instant ramen noodles. In the context of startups, the ramen index can refer to a minimum revenue a founder needs to cover their basic living costs. And effectively, the idea is, okay, if, to your point of privilege, if somebody earns less, they can look at this, even European cities, and say, okay, if I were to move to Bulgaria and start my business there, the ramen index says that I actually only need this much money a month in order to have a standard level of living, which is much less than London or some of these other more expensive cities on the ramen index. And then you might do that for a few years with the plan of, okay, well, from there, I'd like to then move to Munich and then move to Paris and then move to London, rather than starting in London, which is so expensive to live in and difficult to start in. Thought it was an interesting concept.
Yeah, it is. It is an interesting one. I mean, money is, if we get started on that topic, there's so much. It's just the how deeply embedded it is in our society that we need to like earn the right to live, to earn a living, the cost of living. It's just like animals, nature, we don't have that. You don't need to earn a living. Just being alive is enough. And here in London, it's like you cannot do anything without money. You cannot go anywhere. Like we have been able to capture into our monetary system every single act of service, every single gift, every single like possible thing you can imagine has like a money stamp on it. And I think there's places where you can get by with a lot less money, and it's not necessarily because these places are economically poorer, but I think it's because it's places where some services and goods have not yet been captured into the monetary system. And so if you think of childcare, there's a lot of villages where people don't pay for childcare because the village looks after the children after school, and kids can run around and they know that if they go and ring the doorbell somewhere, they're going to get fed by that local family. And so you would be a fool to try and introduce paid childcare there because people know that they can get it for free. Whereas I think in places like London, we are so individualistic and we have to function all independently of one another that everything has been captured under the umbrella of money and everything has to be paid for. And that's also the idea with this chateau is like, can we go back to a gift economy? Can we go to a place where we are of service to one another rather than having to pay for everything?
I really wanted to talk about profit and capitalism because for me, you run Juno is supporting women to learn about investment, which I think is super important, and we're so far behind on what men are doing. However, I personally have often chosen to not be on the stock market and investing because the fundamental question that we're asking businesses to do is to make a 10% profit every year. For me, to make my 10% growth, what does that actually mean on the other side? It often means laying people off. It often means buying cheaper things, maximizing return and profit in whatever way necessary, profit at all costs, capitalism. And that often has hugely detrimental negative effects. And so part of me always feels, well, if I care about fast fashion, if I care about slow fashion and standing against fast fashion and all of these other values I have, then actually investing in a stock market where I'm effectively another person bullying businesses into creating this profit for me to make a return doesn't like sit well with me. And I was wondering, it's important for women to learn all of this stuff, but should they not also know that the nature of businesses growing at this rate and you making these returns and you making this money is all based on these businesses growing at an incredible rate?
Yeah. I mean, oh God, there's so much to say on this topic. And honestly, I don't know what the answer to this is. Like, is money evil? Is it not? Like, should we stop investing in companies? But then men are investing. And so they're just getting more money out of it and they're growing in their position of power whilst we're becoming financially less and less powerful. So there's so much to be said on this. I think the way I look at money is like, it is an agent for change. And it is it is something that allows you to scale your impact. And I think as women, especially in the spiritual circles, there is a very strong discourse of money is evil. I am plugged into abundance. I don't need money. I'm not going to charge more, etc. But I really want people to kind of challenge those assumptions and look at money as essentially just a way to scale your impact. And when women have more money, they tend to invest more ethically. They tend to give back to their communities a lot more. When you give women money, you give community's money. And that money is usually used with a sense of care behind it and a sense of love and a sense of nurturing. Whereas that's not always the case when men have money. And so I think de-devilizing the sort of financial industry for women is going to be one of the most important things we can do, not just so that women have more money, but also so that money becomes more ethical. I think what you care about when it comes to investing is also something that a lot of other women care about, which is ethical investing. And so actually delivering the education to more women means more and more people are going to be investing ethically, and more companies are going to see that there's money going into ethical investments, meaning that they're also going to change the way they do business. So I don't see it as like a black and white thing of like, if you're going to get a 10% return every single year from your investments, therefore it is evil, so don't invest. I think it's, hey, with your money, you have power. The more money you have, the more power you have. Unfortunately, that's true, because the more you can invest and the more you can actually pick companies that are doing well and send the message that this is what we care about now. There's a really cool platform in the UK called Interactive Investor, which actually allows you as a retail investor to vote with your shares, which means that rather than just being a passive investor where you don't contribute to the direction of the company, you're actually going to be able to take that control back. Rather than stepping out of the system, I would say you need to be louder. You need to have more money so you can participate in a better way in the system and get all your girlfriends to have more money so they can also participate in that way, and we can drive internal change. I don't think in the sort of maybe more hippie circles, there's really this idea of like, I'm going to do without money, but there's also, I think there's something about we're lying to ourselves if we think that it's not part of the contract of our incarnation that money is here today. Your soul has decided to land and incarnate in this body today. Yep. And the contract that you've chosen is a world of capitalism and a world of money. So how can we change that rather than just kind of like stepping out of it fully? I don't think that that's the solution.
I think that's true. I think the main education piece is around understanding that you do have you don't just have to invest in the All-American 100 and the biggest tech companies or whoever it is that's winning financially at the moment, that you can choose sustainable and ethical investing. I think is like the layer beneath just investing in general, and having an ISA and being like, oh, maybe if I move it into stocks and shares, I'll make more money. But what stocks and what shares is really interesting to me.
Sorry, I'll just add one thing to that, which a lot of people don't know, is that wherever your money is sitting, unless it is genuinely in cash under your mattress, it is being used. So if you have a lot of savings in your bank account, that money is also being used by the banks to fund typically pretty horrible things. So it's about just taking control back, and being like, I have money, I'm making money, I'm going to decide exactly where it goes. And a savings account is not the solution for it to be ethical.
We've talked a lot about slowing down on a very macro scale, like what it meant for you, how that sits contextually in society. And I'm wondering, now that you have embarked in this kind of new approach, how do you slow down in your day-to-day on a micro level in the decisions that you make just before you do something, when you feel yourself getting stressed or overwhelmed? What are the tools and processes that you use to slow down?
There's a sort of like a little plethora of tools that I kind of step into depending on how I feel. I think there's a lot of body-based tools. So they also teach you at ISTA how to do what they call emotional release, which is how to activate your body. And they really believe that emotions is just sort of like a wave that goes through your body. And if you get your body into movement, and if you got your body into that state, then emotions get released that have been repressed for a long time. And so after doing ISTA for a long time, I was doing some exercises. Like one of them is you go onto your bed and you put a pillow down and you just literally, like, with a lot of noise, because actually voice is really important, you go like, and you scream and you like tap the pillow really strongly. And you do this for like 10, 15 minutes. And the amount of times I've ended up in tears, even though I was completely fine before I started, but just because you're really releasing something, it helps so much. And now my partner and I actually do this on like a regular basis. We're just like, go and find a pillow. And he just goes into the bedroom with like, Argh.
The only way out is through, as my friend used to say. Any other tools? So that's if you don't have a pillow handy and say you're like walking into a meeting and you've got to deliver something.
There's the silent hand scream as well, which you, again, they teach you at ISTA, which is kind of like, and you go like this, and like you try and release energy. You can also, what I do with my therapist is not an ISTA exercise, is closing my eyes, and she tells me to take 3 breaths and then find something in my body that I notice, like something. It's like I can feel my right toe in my shoe, and then like breathing into that 2 or 3 times, and you kind of pick 7 different things, and then when you reopen your eyes, at least for me, I've just like landed in my body a bit more. But almost all of the exercises are about how can I descend into the body again? How can I get out of my mind, really? I also saw a really funny TikTok, which is so true. I've like tried to implement it, which is just like the best thing you can do for your nervous system is slowing down in like everything that you do. And so sometimes I'm just like making coffee and I'm like, slow down. And I'm like doing it a lot slower and like trying
I've seen the girl that just stops walking fast.
Yeah, exactly.
And starts walking very slowly, but it's true.
But you know, I used to be so allergic towards the concept of slowing down. Like I really struggle with people that didn't speak fast enough. I know I speak quite quickly, but I was like, fucking get to the point, like go quicker, you know. I used to always listen to all my podcasts on like speed 1.5, 1.75. Yeah. I'm just like, give me the information as quickly as possible. And like I cook in 5 minutes. I'm just like, it's everything quick. And so just actually taking the time to be like, it's not boredom when you slow down. It's just like noticing subtleties. And there's so much magic in subtleties that I just never picked up on before.
Well, the main thing is if we do all of these things really quickly and you get them all done faster, to what end?
So what? Yeah.
Like now you finish dinner in 15 minutes.
And then what?
And then what? Yeah. And it's, you know, we're all heading to the same destination, like sort of spoiler alert, it's death. And there's no prize for getting there early.
Yeah.
You don't win anything.
No. You also don't win a prize for like being the most agreeable, and you don't win a prize for like completely draining yourself. Like there's no prize to be won here. And yeah. But it's honestly, it's fucking hard because everything around you tells you to go quicker.
Yes.
And a lot of my friends are founders and they tell me about how it's going and what they're achieving. And I'm like, I haven't done anything. You know, it's been months. I don't think I've done anything that's like worth posting on LinkedIn about. And yeah, it's dreadful. It's really scary. It's like this social exclusion thing, you know,
right.
of just, am I still going to be someone? Am I going to be important? Am I going to be lovable? I know the answers to that question.
Yes.
It's just, I need to feel them. And I think only through it actually happening and like seeing it unfolding, I'll be able to trust the safety of like not being this huge personality.
And so what is your working definition of success now?
There's an element of creation, at least for me personally. I love creating. I think, you know, just the act of being alive is such a beautiful creation from nature, and it's like ingrained in us to create something. But the nuance that I didn't have maybe a couple of years ago is it needs to be, one, sustainable. So creating in a way that doesn't harm the environment, doesn't harm people around us, and is like
regenerative,
also personally sustainable, that I can do this for years. And then the second element is really this mantra of like acting out of a place of love, not fear, which sounds super woo-woo, but what I mean by that is how much of what I decide to do is because I have a feeling that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I'm not, you know, going to a party because of fear of missing out rather than I actually want to see the people that are there.
Right.
It's simple things as much as it's big things, you know, buying lots of expensive skincare because, oh, I'm so scared of getting old. And what happens if I get old and maybe I'm not that lovable anymore? Like all of those decisions are based out of a place of fear, and actually just really tuning into, if I fully believe that I'm everything that I need to be today, right now, what is it that I would want to do out of a place of love? And like tuning in on that. That to me would be success, is sort of creating sustainably out of a place of love.
I love that.
What is it for you?
You know, I ask this question because about 6 or 7 years ago, I was in Costa Rica, hanging out by a pool with a woman who was a life coach. She was the first ever person I'd met who had a title of life coach. I didn't really know what that was. I was very obviously like madly suspicious of people like that. I was like, oh, you're a life coach, okay. And so she asked me as we sat by this pool, what's success to you? And I thought about it, like academically, like what does success mean? Like dictionary definition success. And so I started talking and I said, well, I suppose it's in parts of our society where we are given tools to prove that we are better than each other. So academic, if I get a first or if I get a PhD and my goal was to be good at this subject, I've proven to the society that I have succeeded. If I want to be really good at film and I get an Oscar, I have proven against other people who also want to be good at film, Nobel Prize, all of these different things to me were tools in which people could prove to one another via a system that has been mutually agreed upon that I have succeeded. I felt very confident with that definition. I was like, yeah, that's pretty much what success is, right? That is success. And she went, oh, well, that's really sad. Like, your entire definition of success is basically this idea of competition, and what about this makes you personally feel like you have succeeded in this? And then I kind of rethought about it and I said, well, I guess that is my default definition because I was an immigrant to this country. And so my parents and my brother and I constantly had this chip on shoulder or need to prove that we were worthy enough to be here. And the only way that we could do that as people who didn't have money, status, social standing, or a name, or anything that was recognizable was through the vehicles that existed that other people could also join, like school. So we were, my brother was like the best in school, graduated early, went to Imperial, did a master's, did a PhD. It was important that he did all of those things to prove that we were good enough.
Yeah.
And I did the same and so on. And so I think so much of my definition of success was actually kind of mixed up with all of these other emotions I had and experiences I had. It was very personal. And so then in that same moment when she asked me, would you like to kind of redefine it now that you know that we're talking about you? And for me, it's mentoring, like when I feel like I've had a conversation with somebody and like you said earlier, that penny drop moment where they have this aha moment of, wow, I could also do this, or this is also possible, or the world has now been opened up to me, or this idea has been shared with me that's going to change me. And 3 years down the line, getting the phone call or the email from that person that says, hey, that conversation that we had on that day changed my life is super meaningful to me. Collaboration, making things. I think creation is beautiful, but I've never been a true artist. So being able to make them in collaboration and with other people has always been really fulfilling for me. And then success currently also looks like rest, calm, being a relaxed woman, all of those things.
I love that. There's a really famous Instagram post somewhere that is like, the real sign of success is a calm nervous system. And I was like, yes.
Correct. Exactly. That's true. I feel like my nervous system has always been on high alert. Yeah. And now I feel like I'm so much more conscious of when I am anxious, because that feeling comes up in my body, and anxiety is quite a particular feeling. And I'm now able to pinpoint it and go, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Yeah. What is it? Yeah. Rather than constantly being in that state. And I'm wondering, since you've had exposure to all of these new people, since these experiences that you've been having in the last kind of 2 years, is there anyone that you look at and you think, wow, that's somebody whose life I really admire or would like to emulate?
Oh, 100%. Which is someone who's inspired the journey that we're on now with Buying the Castle. Her name is Jessica. I don't know her last name, but she's the owner of Chateau du Fay. And so it's a place that I went to a few months ago for an event that was 4 days long, that was on the topic of consciousness. And basically, it was a lot of friends. Maybe you know some of them. I'm not sure. It was 110 people together in this chateau in France. And they got speakers on the topic of consciousness from spirituality and science and like everything in between together. And so during the daytimes, we had all these wonderful talks, and then there was beautiful dinners, parties at night, etc. I was just like, holy shit, this is the book, The Art of Gathering, but like in practice. And I had just read that book. I was like, I want to find these people. And I went to this week and I was like absolutely blown away. But what really was incredible is Jessica, the owner of this chateau, she will find it hilarious that I know her entire life story because I spoke to her for 10 minutes, but I've stalked everything I could find online. But basically, she bought this castle at age 27 after having studied architecture in the US. And I think she lived in an intentional community in the US, from what I've heard. And she wanted to recreate this in France. And so she bought the castle. I think she got like 100K deposit, but the price was 1.4 million. So like huge risk, and did that at 27.
Wow.
And what she's been able to create just seems insane. Like for 4 months during the year, they run events. And having been at the Consciousness event, the events are outrageously good. And then for the other 8 months, they run this intentional community where people stay for a few months and they kind of live differently, completely. And I went there and I was like, this is the first time in my life that I look at someone's life and I'm like, I would kill to have exactly what you have built. This seems like a dream. And so I came back home, I spoke to Louis and I was like, there's this chateau, blah, blah, blah. And literally within 2 months, we're like, okay, he quit his job. We're leaving London and we're trying to do the same.
It's interesting because I think you should also try and have a conversation with this woman because
Totally.
So many of the heroes that we look up to, there is also, she would sit you down and tell you, this is the hard side of it that you don't see. There's also this stuff and maybe could give you some really interesting learnings before you embark in on this. I think as a young person, it's also so hard to make the decision of, I want to be here 12 months a year. I'll be here. I'll be running this community. I'll be doing these events. It involves a lot of locationally being in one place. Yeah. And you've obviously traveled and been everywhere for so long. Do you think you would be able to sit in one location for so long?
It's a really good question. I mean, these are all the fears that I'm kind of confronting at the moment. But I really believe that having more of a relationship with the land that I am on and, being able to eat food that I am growing and being able to really slow down with the seasons, it's something that is kind of part of this transformation. And we'll still be able to travel every now and then. I mean, I'm sure, I don't think a castle would be too hard to find a couple of friends that are like, hey, can you keep it for 2 weeks while we're away? I think it wouldn't be too hard.
I also think it's the idea of build it and they will come.
Yeah.
Like so much of, I get at least my life because I didn't have, I didn't come from any kind of wealth where I could invite people to this amazing house, I grew up in a tiny council flat in the middle of London. So anything I wanted to host had to be outside of that house. Yeah. And I was always seeking for places. And actually now some of the people that I admire the most have built the spaces in where they are. So people come to them. Yeah. They have an art studio that you want to come and visit. They have a farm in Ibiza that's beautiful that people want to go to. And they stay there and they don't mind because people come to them. I talked about this with my friend Boyd Varty, whose family run a huge game reserve in outside of Cape Town in South Africa called Londolozi. And he said, I don't need to go anywhere. Yeah. If I create something here that is truly magical, that I believe in, that is ignites something, creates transformation, sparks joy, people will come to me. And so the best minds in the world, all the people he's ever wanted to meet have just come to him. And that takes time. Obviously, it's not going to be your first retreat that everybody is going to show up at, but it takes time and consistency and really continuing on with the project for a long time.
I deeply believe in this. And I think also there's so much of the traveling that I've done over the last few years that has been escapism because of feeling like I didn't belong in London and not feeling this sense of community. So I have this, I share your view completely. And I really deeply, deeply feel inside of me that if I am rooted in a place and I have this sense of belonging to the land, to the people around me, so much of what I consume and this like more attitude that I've had will disappear, and traveling is part of this. I've never traveled as much as I have since living in London, and it's just because I feel so disconnected from everything in London, and so I just escape, because I'm trying to find like calm and nature and communities that I can be a bit closer to, and I think that will just kind of naturally fade away. Hopefully. But it's a huge risk. I mean, we're going to spend a month in Chateau du Fay now and like see how it is. Hopefully, Jessica will not be terrified by the fact that I know her entire life story on day one of showing up. But Yeah, she really talks a lot about collaboration over competition as well. And so
how can you work with her?
Exactly.
How can you build more of the same? I think the spaces and the industries where the founders and the leaders turn around and say, join us, do your own thing. Here's my template, that it's all shareable information rather than being guarded and saying, oh no, we couldn't possibly give them our IP or our information of how to do this. They'll start their own business that does an industry where it's like, we want you to do the same thing as us because we think it's great for society. Yeah. That's probably where you want to be. There's something in that. Yeah. My last question is, if you were to direct me to a movie, a song, a piece of art, anything that you think would help me to understand you better as a person, what would it be?
Can it be a book?
Yes.
Definitely Charles Eisenstein, for sure. If you're more into like the finance side of things, then something called Sacred Economics, written by him. If it's more like less focused on finance and just like general societal changes, I think it's the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. It's an incredible book. And I've read so many kind of more alternative books in the last like 2 years. And then I picked this one up and I was like, oh, this is such a good like TLDR of everything else I've ever read.
Great.
So yeah, Charles Eisenstein, he's really, really onto something. And he's very positive, which I adore, because there's a lot of like, the world is ending, we fucked everything up. And he's like, no, there's hope. And he's very positive about how we can make changes.
Yes, I think change only comes from positive storytelling and igniting people on the idea of there's a new way to do something, join us, it will be great, it will be fun, get involved. Exactly. That kind of action, it imbues more action and stuff.
Positive reinforcement, not fear.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a real joy. I feel like you and I could talk for hours about this stuff.
I feel like I want to ask you lots of questions. Podcast is so like one directional.
Yes.
But thank you for having me. This has been really good questions as well. Really appreciate.
Thank you for your time. Yes, thank you for being open and vulnerable and letting us have a more personal conversation. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was hosted and created by me, Tiana Tambridge. It was produced by Whitney Rosenthal. Sound and video recording, mixing, editing and mastering is by Brazen Studios. Cover art designed by Natalia Ruche. Please subscribe to The Slowdown to be notified of upcoming episodes. Tell a friend and leave a review, because it really helps a new podcast like this get out there into the world. And remember, we're all heading to the same destination and there is no prize for getting there early, so we might as well slow down.